over 3 decades. Oh, thank you very much. So I've been involved in road safety, driver education, call it what you will now, for over 34 years. Started my own business as a driving instructor, worked in the public sector for Staffordshire County Council for 13 odd years. I'm now back in the private sector and running my own driver risk management consultancy. So my plan is this evening is for me not to do all the work. And this is, I suppose, the theme of what I'm going to be talking about tonight is more of an educational thing, really, is how you and I as industry professionals can probably work together. So normally when we do these sort of things, we ask people to put their mobile phones away, don't we? I'm going to ask you to do the opposite, actually get your mobile phone out. And wherever you see this little red hand with the phone on it, means there's a bit of audience participation. So if you've got your mobile phones to hand, what I'd like you to do is to scan the QR code that you can see on the screen, or if you launch your browser and go to slido.com and you key in that number 1170321, that should open up Slido and allow you to have a little bit of a play with some of the slides that I'm going to be doing next. So hopefully the majority of you have got Slido up now. You're going to need internet access to be able to do that. And this is going to launch a question on your phone as well as on the screen, and then we'll be able to see the results as they come up. So let's try the first one. So as a profession, not you as an individual, but as a profession, how confident do you think the health and safety professionals are at helping businesses to introduce a really robust driver risk management program, as would be expected by the health and safety executive? So I'm just trying to get a sense of what goes on within the industry. Okay, so we've got a mixture of results coming, haven't we? So from, oh yeah, a few people changing their minds as well. Look, so what we're saying is, one, I'm not particularly confident that our industry is able to do exactly what's required. To 10, yep, totally got it covered. Right, this is interesting. This is kind of what I thought, and what I'm tending to find when I go around working with businesses, they say, yeah, we've got the process in place. I have a little look, and then I find that, yeah, they've got a few things, but maybe not as comprehensive as we would need. Okay, thanks ever so much for that. So we proved the technology works. Hope you enjoyed that little bit of interaction. There's some more a little bit later on. So what's the scale of the problem and what we're going to be covering this evening? So I thought it would be useful if we look at some stats and facts that support why we consider driving as a high-risk activity. We'll take a little bit of a look at the legislation that underpins why driver safety should be managed within a business. And then we'll look at some of the potential consequences when things go wrong. And very often, they're the drivers that would lead a business to thinking, do you know what, I think I probably need to address this. We'll have a little bit of a look at what good looks like. And then I'll just share some of my finding as to what businesses tend to do or don't do. And then we'll have a little look at how I see the health and safety profession helping. By helping, I mean helping the clients we work with, and potentially how I might be able to support you in that quest. So first of all, let's just set the scene by looking at the scale of the problem in the UK. So driving is considered a high-risk activity. It's not me that says that, it's the health and safety executives say that. And a quarter of all the collisions that take place on the road network will involve somebody who at the time of the incident was driving as part of their work. Now, it's important that we get our clients to understand that driving for work doesn't mean, we're not talking about delivery drivers and people like that. We're talking about anybody, for whatever reason, have to go into a motor vehicle, regardless of who owns it, and make a trip on behalf of that business. Okay. 95% of collisions have driver error as the main contributory factor. Now, for some, they would say, wow, that's worrying. I think that's a brilliant thing, because if we were to say 95% of collisions had mechanical failure as the main factor, we're doomed. Okay, but because it's people, there's an opportunity for us to address those issues with those people and make a change. Now, this is important when it comes to businesses that don't adequately check the sort of the compliance of their drivers and vehicles. 22% of drivers in the UK are currently using out-of-date documents. That's a little bit worrying. Over 1 million drivers are just 3 penalty points away from losing their license. So if you're a business that relies on people being mobile and you don't check people's licenses regularly, how are you going to know if they're only 3 points away from losing their license? And if they do lose their license, what impact does that have on the operations of the business? And then 250,000 drivers a year, according to the Department for Transport, are disqualified each year. I once worked with the clients who we discovered once we put robust checks in place that they actually had a driver who was disqualified and was driving a £60,000 company vehicle. So that driver was soon taken off driving duties. And here's an interesting fact, that anybody who drives spent about 80% of their annual mileage on work-related journeys, they have a 50% more injury collision rates than, let's say, compared to our private drivers. So yeah, driving's a pretty risky thing, really, isn't it? Yeah, we all do it. What are the stats looking like for 2022? These are the figures that have been released to June 2022. And the important thing here is these are what we call reported. So whilst you probably can't hide fatalities, so we're probably quite comfortable with the fact that we have an accurate figure of 1,760 people that sadly lost their lives on the roads, 29,804 injuries, and 137 and 13 casualties. Those are the reported. I imagine the scale of the problem is a lot bigger than that with those unreported ones. Remember that 25% of these will involve somebody who's driving at work. So what does that look like from a work perspective? Well, 440 people killed whilst driving at work during the year, 7,451 seriously injured, 34,253 could suffer some form of casualty. So it is a concern. It is an area of health and safety that I think businesses should sort of take seriously as part of their overall management of health and safety at work. Interestingly, you may remember that we always used to hear the term RTA, road traffic accident. Okay, for many years now, the police now refer to these as an RTC, a road traffic collision. And that's because they're saying a crash is a crash. An accident is something that you couldn't avoid. But remember, 95% of these so-called accidents have driver error as the main contributory factor. So therefore, the police authorities now refer to them as collisions and not accidents. So collisions happen all too easily. Let's take a look at one example captured on my very own dash cam in my car a couple of years ago. So watch carefully. There's no sound because of the expletives. Now that guy very courteously thanked me for not running him over as he disappeared around the front of that cab to go for a wee. So imagine if I wasn't the sort of driver that was thinking, what if the driver steps out? What if the vehicle moves off? What if there's something going on there? And by asking those questions, I slowed down and I was able to deal with that situation calmly. It could have ended really, really badly, as I'm probably imagine you could imagine. So here's a little bit more audience participation now. So grab your mobile phones. There's a question coming up. What I'd like you to answer is, where do you think most collisions occur? Is it going to be on an urban road, a rural road, or motorways? Where do you think? So collisions, we're talking about crashes. Okay, you can see the figures adjusting a little bit there. So it looks as if we're sort of saying around about 60% of you think that it's urban roads, 30%, interestingly, think it's motorways, and rural roads, 10%. So let's have a look at what the actual official figures are. So yes, if you thought that the urban environment is where most collisions occur, you're absolutely right. 72% of crashes happen in and around those areas. And if you think about it, it's bound to, isn't it? Because we've got lots and lots and lots of stuff going on. We've got junctions and roundabouts and people and crossings and goodness knows what else goes on. Rural roads, we've got a lot less of that. And motorways are our safest roads because in theory, and I say this in theory, everybody's traveling in the same direction, aren't they? So, and we haven't got all of the complicated hazards to deal with that we have on urban environments. Now let's flip the question around a little bit, okay? And let's ask you now, where do you think most fatalities occur? So same three road environments, urban, rural, or motorways. What do you think? Okay, so it's looking as if motorways are coming up at the top of the list at the moment, with rural roads being 45%. Okay, let's have a little look at the results then. This might surprise you. So motorways, again, only 5% of fatalities happen on the motorways. Because as I said, in theory, if you think about it, no junctions, roundabouts, hills, bends, traffic lights, everything's moving in the same direction. Unfortunately, when there's an incident, it's usually a bad one. And it usually causes a lot of headaches from all of the holdups. And very often the outcome is not good for the occupants, but they're few and far between. Whereas if you look at the rural roads, 51% of fatalities take place on rural roads and a little bit less in urban environments. Now, if we look at the fatalities that happen in the urban environments, they are going to be people outside of the vehicle, vulnerable road users, usually pedestrians and cyclists. Whereas on rural roads, the fatalities usually tend to occur from the car occupants. So the risks shifts very different from inside to outside of the vehicle. So this is quite relevant to any business that's attempting to manage risk by actually looking at the types of journeys that their staff make on a regular basis and where it is they might divert some of their resource into addressing some of these. So let's now have a little look at some of the common sort of situations that we bunch together as work-related collision factors. These are not in order of priority. They are just on the top list of things that happen. So drinking and driving, and particularly with regards to the morning after, and we'll see a lot more of this coming up to the festive season, probably during the football matches, particularly if England get high up in the tournament as well. A lot of pub going, a lot of drinking going on, a lot of people driving the next day. And this is when the police will tend to do their breath tests. Something else which is distractions, and particularly with regards to the mobile phone, and particularly with regards to texting and doing other things on a handheld device. Speeding or inappropriate use of speed. So speeding we tend to be talking about is over the posted speed limit, but inappropriate speed is where the driver failed to adjust their speed for the conditions that prevailed at that time. Inattention to the driving task, and that can be anything the driver does that takes their mind away from the driving task and makes a bad decision. I always think this is staggering when you consider that for the vast majority of us, we've been used to wearing seatbelts for the most of our driving life, haven't we? And yet a third of all the deaths on the road will involve somebody who wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Not necessarily a driver, but somebody within that vehicle that ends up by being a loose cannon if the vehicle starts to turn over. And of course, there's the drugs and the driving, and the police authorities are now telling us that drugs and driving is vastly starting to overtake drinking driving as an issue. And fatigue is one that also features very high. Now, all of these are topics that we can, in one way or another, address as part of a good driver risk management program, stroke driver training sort of based activity within a business. And if a business is thinking, yeah, but surely it's going to cost me money to do this, let's just have a little look at the true cost of a collision, because we always refer to this as what we call the tip of the iceberg. Now, according to the International Loss Control Institute, they say that for every £1 that an insurer pays out for repairing or replacing that vehicle, the uninsured losses can be anything between £8 and £53. So that's quite colossal. We tend to call these the hidden costs, don't we? And they're the sort of costs that don't always easily identify themselves on a balance sheet. It's going to depend on the margin that the business works to as well. I remember going to a conference a few years ago for the organizer of the company called Lafarge. They used to be Blue Circle Cement. And their risk manager said, every time a lorry driver breaks a lorry mirror, we have to sell 53 bags of cement to recoup the cost for repairing that one mirror. And that was just a minor incident. So imagine an incident costs £5,000 and you're working to a very, very tight margin. How much more stuff are you going to have to sell to cover those costs? So therefore, is investing in some form of driver risk management program actually financially a sensible thing to do, as well, of course, being the right thing to do from a duty of care point of view? So that leads me quite nicely on now to looking at the legislation that underpins why driver risk should be managed. And I'm sure you guys and girls know this stuff. So this is definitely teaching grandmother how to suck eggs. But a lot of businesses will turn around and say, well, I wasn't aware I had to manage driver safety. Well, yeah, it actually falls under the Health and Safety at Work Act and the Health and Safety Work regulations, but also there's the Road Traffic Act that fits in. There's the Construction and Use Act, but also the provision and use of work equipment regulations kick in, because the Health and Safety Executive and the courts would see a motor vehicle when being used for work as a piece of work equipment. And therefore, an employer has a legal duty to make sure that appropriate information and training is provided for the use of that equipment. And some would argue, but they passed the driving test, they've got a license, haven't they? Surely that is demonstration of competency enough. Well, good luck with defending that in court when something goes horribly wrong. So something else that I tend to find that I have to do a little bit of explaining with businesses I work with is to get them to understand what is and what isn't a work-related journey. Because as I'm sure you know, an employer has no responsibility, well, no legal responsibility for an employee's commute to and from work. So quite simply, if all we do is we come from home, we go to work, wherever that may be, and then we go back again, it's not work-related, not the responsibility of the employer. However, what tends to happen the next day is a member of staff is asked on their way or on your way into work, we'd like you to call off at XYZ and drop off this parcel and then come into work. That changes things dramatically because that then makes that whole journey work related. There's a lot of businesses where they tend to think of people that drive for work as people like delivery drivers and sales reps and people like that. They tend to forget other people in the business who might make that occasional journey, might be asked to go to a conference, might be asked to run an errand, might be asked to go to a training event. I remember working with a company fairly recently that had completely missed the thought that they got apprentices that would drive into work 4 days of the week. And on the 5th day, they would be sent off to college. That made that journey to college, from home to college and back again, work related. And they hadn't thought about that. Okay, so what about when things go wrong? Well, usually it's the police that will start the investigation. I don't know whether you guys are aware of this, but when there is a serious incident, the police have what is called a Stats 19 form that they have to fill in. It's a gigantic piece of paper, double-sided with hundreds and hundreds of questions. But the one that I'm interested in is the question that asks for the purpose of the journey. And the police have to identify the purpose of the journey. Was it for pleasure purposes or was it work related? And if it's identified as work related and it's serious enough, then the business can expect a visit from the police authority. And if the police authority feel that there are severe failings in the management of the business's health and safety for driving activities, they can tip off the health and safety executive, who will then do their own investigations as well. And of course, what tends to happen is a no-win, no-fee lawyer parachutes out the sky, don't they? And they want to take up the case on a no-win, no-fee basis. So the private litigation is something that really we don't want on the business's backs. And then, of course, the media as well. I'm old enough and ugly enough to remember that sort of today's news was tomorrow's chip paper. Not anymore. Once something hits the media, it's there for absolutely ever and a day, isn't it? So I'm just going to pull up and just show you 3 examples of what is still in the media. And I expect a lot of you will actually remember some of these incidents. This was called the Grissingham haulage and commonly called the Bath tipper truck crash. I don't know if anybody remembers that. Basically, in 2015, a driver lost control of his tipper truck, and very sadly, 4 people lost their lives. The driver, who was only 19, he was arrested at the scene on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving. And then that day also, the business owner, Matthew Gordon, was arrested of suspicion of causing death by manslaughter. And then the investigations took place, and eventually on May 2016, Peter Woods, who was the company's mechanic, he was then arrested for gross negligence manslaughter charges. Subsequently, in 2017, the driver was actually acquitted. He had done all of the proper safety checks that he was asked to do. He couldn't have possibly have known he was taking charge of an unsafe vehicle. And as a result of this, Matthew Gordon, the business owner, he got a 7-year and 6-month custodial sentence for corporate manslaughter. And his mechanic, who failed to carry out his work diligently on that particular day, got a custodial sentence of 5 years and 3 months. So he got charged with gross negligence manslaughter. And to this day, you can go onto Google and Google the Bath tipper truck crash, and up comes all that information, and it will be there forever and ever. Remember this one? Okay, this is quite recent. What we actually see here in the media, not good news for FedEx, but we see a pretty mashed up FedEx truck. But you may remember there was a foreign heavy goods vehicle driver that had fallen asleep in lane 1, a minibus coming up behind it. And unfortunately, the FedEx truck plowed into the back of the minibus, pushed it into the stationary truck, and there were a lot of fatalities involved. A lot of separate cases going on there, but for the FedEx driver, it was discovered that he was on a hands-free conversation, and his mind was elsewhere. So when we start to look at mobile phone policies and a business that says, oh yeah, we're quite comfortable with allowing hands-free, I think we need to look at this case to actually show, actually, is that a wise thing to do? And then finally, you may remember I talked earlier on about the types of incidents that cause work-related incident, and fatigue was one of them. And this is a really good example of a company called Renown Consultants, who were fined £750,000 under Section 2 and 3 of the Health and Safety at Work Act for failing in their duty of care. Now, the interesting thing here was that the incident took place in 2013. Sentencing didn't take place in 2020. So for 7 years, that business owner would be having conversations with his lawyers. Will I go to prison? Are we going to get fined? What's going to happen? Can you just imagine getting up every single day to that? The business were very, very lucky, I think, that they weren't charged with corporate manslaughter, because it was a double fatality. £750,000 is not a lot, I don't think, for the loss of 2 lives. And when you go and investigate this case, you realize that there was so much more that business could have done very, very, very simply and easily and cost effectively to have managed the risks that would have meant that driver would have not made that bad decision on that day. So going back to the, think back to the LGV driver that stepped out on me, okay. Imagine his employer gets the news that his employee has been involved in a serious incident, possibly a fatality, okay, and that the police are involved and they want to come and interview the business. Would you imagine that the business needs to be 100% confident that they have everything in place to manage driver risk? They know they're going to be under scrutiny. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to show you a 6-minute video that shows what that scrutiny looks like, what a typical police investigation looks like. Now, I'm hoping that you give a thumbs up.
We seem to be going round in circles.
What do you mean by that?
Every time I ask you, you say you're working on it.
That's because I'm working on it.
Okay. When will we have it?
I'm working on it.
See what I mean?
I am working on it. I just need to give them some more time.
Jim, I've been hearing these excuses for too long.
Wait a minute, it's not my fault. They need other directors to sign off on it. I have been chasing this for months, trying to get it over the line.
So, when do you see them next?
I'm meeting them this morning. I've been up half the night creating a new presentation for the meeting. And now I'm running late.
Make sure you get the order this time. What about the other contract you said you would get signed?
Oh, that one? It's fallen through.
Jim, it's costing me a fortune to keep you on the road. We need to talk later.
Why have you taken this attitude, all of us?
Jim? 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 Are you there? Can you hear me, Jim? 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 Are you there? Can you hear me, Jim? Jim? Didn't we put a hands-free kit in his car? It's not against the law to use a hands-free phone when you're driving.
Yes, but you were on with him for 10 minutes and you were arguing with him at the time. The police will consider that a distraction.
But that was at the end of the call.
And that's all it takes.
What's in our health and safety policy about using mobile phones on the road?
Nothing. You told me not to worry about it.
So you're the person responsible for fleet and transport activities in the company?
Yes.
And you're the managing director?
Yes.
Well, this is an initial inquiry into the tragic road traffic collision. The investigation is at an early stage, but we have reason to believe that the driver was on their mobile phone at the time, so we need to see your mobile phone policy.
Our drivers all have hands-free kits. There's nothing illegal about that, is there?
Well, let's just say I'll be looking at how you manage your road activities in respect of your drivers and vehicles.
So what exactly do you need to see?
Your policies, your procedures, your risk assessments you have in place. I'll need records showing the vehicle was roadworthy and proof of when it was last checked. Your driving licence and insurance checks. Proof that you've checked your drivers with no medical conditions that would impair their driving. Your mobile phone policy and how you prove that your drivers stick to it. Your driver training records. Evidence of how you make your employees aware of what you expect. And your daily safety checks.
They don't have any of this.
There are a number of things that you've asked for that we don't have.
Well, my advice is get me what you do have. The next stage will be an interview at the police station. I'd advise you to consider bringing a solicitor, as it may be an interview under caution.
They're going to be hung out to dry, and rightly so.
Was the vehicle roadworthy?
They should have checked this and kept records.
When was the last time you checked the driver's licence and insurance?
If they'd bothered checking, they'd have seen I had 9 points on my licence.
Also your mobile phone policy and how you ensure your drivers stick to it.
No sentence that I pass can compensate for the loss of a life and the impact on the grieving family. However, in these circumstances, it's quite clear that the company took no steps to manage what is a work activity with the highest degree of risk that can, and has in this case, resulted in the death of an employee. The company has demonstrated a complete disregard by not putting into place safe systems of work that are designed to safeguard their employees and the general public. This goes far beyond irresponsibility and elevates sentencing to a higher level of appropriate sanction. It also sends a clear message to other companies that tragic occurrences such as these will be dealt with in the most severe terms. On count one of corporate manslaughter.
So whilst that's got quite a serious tone, you can't help but think back to a program donkeys years ago called Randall and Hot Coat Disease, can you? When that chap got out the vehicle. And whilst the incident involving that was to do with a mobile phone, it can be any work-related incident that can do that. So you can see the type of scrutiny that that business was under. And it's things like a driver safety policy that they're going to be looking at every little line of that. So it's got to be really, really robust. And when things go wrong and they do get taken to court, then these are the potentials, as I'm sure you'll be aware of this, because it's the same to do with any failing in health and safety, that there are substantial fines that are based on a percentage of their turnover. And we're typically seeing 20% of the turnover as being the starting point fine. And of course, there's going to be corporate manslaughter charges with custodial sentences if there are fatalities involved. And there's also a thing called a publicity order, which is a little little known thing really, but this is where a court can actually say to a business, because we found you guilty of your failing in your duty of care, you've got to tell the whole wide world this yourself. So you've got to take out paid advertising in your local papers. You've got to publicize it on your website. You've been a naughty business and this is what you've been found guilty of. And there are some interesting examples of publicity orders out there. I would certainly hate to have that on my website if I was a business. And then individuals within that business, and I think this is where it's very important when we start to work with businesses, particularly businesses that have line managers, that we need to make sure line managers are aware of their responsibilities and the parts that they play in helping the business manage driver safety. Because if a line manager is aware of some unsafe practices going on and they turn a blind eye to it, then there is a possibility that they themselves can find themselves in court, a little bit like the mechanic did with the Bath tipper truck. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this slide for too long because I'm sure you know, being in the profession you're in, that how fines are calculated using the sentencing guidelines. But I always just think the example that I pulled off the HSC's website of a business that was turning over, let's say, £600,000 could be facing a fine between 300 and 1.5 million for a medium culpability stroke harm case. So yeah, that's really, really going to hurt even the smallest of businesses, isn't it? Okay, so this is all the scary stuff, isn't it? So what does good driver risk management look like then? So let's just put that under the microscope for a little bit, first of all. For me, the first thing is that it's all about the culture and the management. It's got to be led by the top. And if the business say, do you know what, we accept driving as a high risk activity, we care about our people, we want to make sure we do everything we possibly can to keep our staff safe and do the right thing for the people that our staff come into contact with, that's a great culture. And that it's a management thing, isn't it? Then we start to look at the practicalities. The first thing is we need to make sure we have a comprehensive risk assessment of all of our driving activities. How can we mitigate risks that we're not aware of? It's everyday health and safety stuff, isn't it? Having identified those risks, what we now need to do is we now need to create a driver safety policy and potentially a handbook. Now, in each of our professions, we have certain language, don't we, that we talk. And in my world, a driver safety policy is exactly what that word suggests. It's the business's do's and don'ts. It articulates to the employees what the expected standards and processes and procedures are. And it also flips it round, but also articulates to the employee what the employer will do to protect them as well. The handbook is what I call the pink and fluffy thing. This is where we put the advice, the guidance, the hints and tips on winter driving, the stuff that it's nice information to impart. And it's a good idea to try and separate advice and guidance and policy. Okay, so I would normally draft a policy for a business, And then we will introduce a driver safety handbook, which is that thing that you keep in the glove box, which you get out and flick through the pages when you want to sort of find a few bibs and bobs on safe and fuel efficient driving. Key to this is that we must have systems administration. We've got to be able to evidence that we have a robust driver risk management process in place. So remember when the police officer was asking for, I need to see, show me what you do, explain how. It can't be anecdotal. You've got to be able to evidence it. So whether this is with a spreadsheet or whether it's with a bespoke driver risk management system, it doesn't matter, so long as what can't speak can't lie. Okay, you need a system to do it. Okay. Something else, we need to make sure that we're checking driving licenses in a GDPR fashion. I'll come back to that in a few moments. And we also need to be thinking about, on a day-to-day process, are we risk profiling our drivers? Now, I don't mean putting them through some psychometric program every day, but are eyes and ears open? Are we aware of what's going on? Are we using collision statistics? Are we using anecdotal information to manage the risk of our driving fraternity on a day-by-day basis? And then do we offer our drivers appropriate training? And I include managers in that, because training can be driver training, but it can be training for managers on what part they play to help a business look after the interests of that business from a driver safety point of view. And then finally, of course, it's all about how we communicate this to our employees, and that we need to review our driver risk management on a regular basis. So that said, okay, what do businesses do and don't do? This is what I think most businesses tend to do when it comes to driver safety. It's the proverbial bury your head in the sand. It won't happen to me. We haven't had anything bad happen in the past. I've got lots of mates who own businesses. They've all got drivers. They haven't suffered a serious incident. So it's not going to happen to me. Okay, so if your appetite for risk is high, and that's the attitude you want to take, then I don't think anybody like myself is going to persuade them otherwise. What I do tend to find some businesses tend to do is they have a driver handbook and they do a license check. The handbook, I very often find when I look at it, it's a little bit wishy-washy. It's usually over 1 or 2 pages. It's a load of bullet points and it jumps from topic to topic. When I create a driver safety policy for a client, mine is 23 pages long and it's really, really detailed. It has to be, because when it goes to court and the prosecution then start to unpick and look under the veneer of, let's say, something quite as simple as your mobile phone policy, we've got to be really, really robust in how we articulate what our rules are. And license checking is something else I find a lot of businesses do, but do they do it well? So here's a question for you guys and girls. So grab your mobile phones. Is asking to see an employee's driving license an adequate enough check? Brilliant. I am so pleased to see that come out as 100%, because that is not the case out in the business world. The number of businesses that I work with that say, oh yeah, we check licenses. Excellent, well done. What do you do? Yeah, we ask to see the license and we take a photocopy. Oops. Okay, so we're breaking GDPR rules there straight away. And as you know, the plastic license that we now have, or if you possess an old paper counterpart, it doesn't show you the endorsable points on there. I have some businesses that say, yeah, we've got the staff members' national insurance number on file, and we know their driving license number, so we go on the DVLA portal. Ooh, okay, that's not what that's designed to do. We know that we should ask the employee to get a DVLA check code. Then the employee goes on a different part of a website and has a look. Or if you've got lots and lots of licenses to check, you're probably far better engaging the services of an external driving license checking provider. So license checking, a lot of businesses say they do it, an awful lot don't do it properly. Something else I also find within businesses that they do fairly well or not fairly well is how they look after their vehicle fleet. Now, I don't get involved in anything commercial. It's all to do with cars, vans and minibuses. And this is a little bit of a spot the difference. So we've got, apart from the colour, they're identical vehicles, aren't they? Except what's on the number plate. One's a company car, one's my own vehicle used for work purposes. The industry call it grey fleet. The business has a legal duty to make sure that the vehicle is suitable for the job, taxed, MOT, has business insurance, suitably maintained, and that the driver carries out regular pre-drive safety checks. So here's another question for you. Which of the following vehicle groups do you think businesses usually manage well? In your experience, which of those do they manage well? Neither, both, just the grey fleet or the company vehicle fleet? Yeah, that's good. So in my experience, you tend to find that the vast majority of businesses that have company provided vehicles, they generally look after those quite well. They know who the drivers are. They're very often leased. The lease provider is going to take care of things like tax and MOT, servicing, etc. They're definitely on a radar and they're looked after well. The grey fleet, and it's interesting how the industry has used that word grey, because we tend to use the word, it's a bit of a grey area, don't we? A lot of businesses I work with weren't aware that they had a grey fleet. They wouldn't have considered that somebody in the administration team that very occasionally goes and runs an errand or goes to the bank or would be a grey fleet driver, and they would not have thought that they have to actually take responsibility for that vehicle. So we tend to find that the grey fleet is the one that is managed, the poor relations of all of them. So how do I see your profession helping in our quest to make our roads a safer place to be? I think we need to educate business leaders. Okay, I think what we need to do is we need to encourage them to recognize that driving and driver safety is one of those things that they must do, and it's the right thing to do, not only because they have a legal duty of care, but it's the right thing to do because it puts people first. I think we then need to educate and encourage business leaders to take the lead, to get executive sponsorship, and identify somebody within the business who will champion road safety. The biggest problem I have people say to me, Adrian, who would you ideally want to target in a business? And I go, well, let me tell you a story. If we've got a couple of people playing golf one Sunday afternoon, and one business person says to the next, do you know what, I'm up in court tomorrow. Why is that? We've had a serious incident and I'm up in court. Right, okay. The other business person is going to go into the office the next Monday morning and he's going to say to his health and safety manager, I need you to sort out driver safety. And the health and safety manager is probably going to say, hang on a minute, I'm all about the building, the fabric, and the sort of trips and falls and fire evacuation and everything else that goes with it. Don't give me drivers and vehicles. That's the fleet manager's job. Okay, so the chief exec goes off to the fleet manager and says to the fleet manager, I need you to sort out our driver safety. Hang on a minute, no, I'm about the acquisition, maintenance and disposal of the vehicle fleets. Don't give me people, that's HR. So HR then go, hang on a minute, whoa, we're about, sort of onboarding and disciplinary and contracts of employment and all that stuff. Don't give us drivers to look after. So can you see the big crack that opens up? And all of a sudden, driver safety falls into it. So whoever is in responsibility in that business, we've got to encourage them to embrace this, identify somebody within the business who can become the champion, and then work with us as professionals to help them manage driver safety. So when the police come knocking at the door and they ask the chief exec, can I see? You can put hand on heart and go, yes, you can. Okay, so that's the sort of thing I think we need to do. And then what we need to do is we need to find out, well, what have you got? Where are the gaps? And how do we fill those gaps for you? Because I always think about good driver risk management. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You've got the picture, you know what it looks like. You've probably got the bits. You might find that one department have 3 bits, another department have another couple of bits. Actually, there's a little bit missing here. We don't know where that is. Rarely do I find that people bring the jigsaw puzzle together. It's a bit fragmented. So we might find that HR do a license check and fleet management look after vehicles. And that's a business that have those people in. A lot of businesses don't have them. So once we've identified those gaps, what we need to do is formulate and introduce a robust driver risk management program. And that can be multifaceted. It can be quite straightforward and simple for a small business. It can be quite complex for a larger business. What we then need to make sure we do is we review it regularly. We use lessons learned over the course of that period. And what we're striving for is zero harm in the workplace. Whether we'll ever achieve that is another matter. There's no reason why we couldn't strive for that. So if we have that culture that looks for zero harm, we're going to make some amazing inroads. What are the benefits then? Well, they're huge. Doing the right thing for employees, that's got to be a good thing, hasn't it? Particularly in this day and age when we're trying to retain good staff. It's going to ensure that you are compliant with health and safety law. It's going to enhance the business's corporate social responsibilities. It should see fewer collisions and incidents. It should see fewer days off that are a result of work-related ill health. And it should increase the fuel economy and bring down the fleet running costs. Importantly, if you are a business that operates a vehicle fleet, it should put you in a good position to negotiate lower insurance premiums. I work with a number of insurance brokers that understand what good driver risk management looks like, and their underwriters are more and more now asking for measures in place to manage risk before the underwriters will quote. And at the end of the day, a business's greatest asset has got to be their staff, and you can't put a price on their safety, can you? So what do we need to look out for, and what sort of questions can we ask? And we're coming towards the end now, you'll be pleased to know. So look out for businesses who have cars, vans or minibuses. And what would we ask them? Well, quite simply, do any of your staff drive as part of their work? And you might need to delve a little bit deeper into that, because initially they're going to be thinking drivers as in somebody who is in the vehicle all the time, because that's what they do. They deliver stuff, okay? But in most businesses, there will be the vast majority of people at some point will probably be involved in a work-related journey, some occasionally, some quite regularly. What does your company do to manage driver risk? There's a loaded question. And the acid test, if something went horribly wrong for one of your drivers and you found yourself under investigation by the police authority or the health and safety executive, and you put hand on heart and say with 100% confidence that, yes, we've got absolutely everything in place to manage our legal duty of care, and I can show you. Okay, what do you want to see? Okay, that's a little bit like the police officer that was asking that question. So finally, I'm here to help you guys and girls. I recognize, I'm cognizant of the fact that you provide a wealth of support for health and safety in the workplace on a whole variety of topics and disciplines. I'm just wondering whether there might just be a little piece of the jigsaw puzzle that is missing that I hold. And that is that I specialize in driver risk management and driver training. So I might just be the person that holds that little bit of a jigsaw puzzle that can help you to enhance the service that you provide to your particular clients. My area of speciality is anything that can be driven on a car license. I call it the unregulated transport sector. It's a car, a van or a minibus. I don't get involved in these big bad boys. They have their own experts, and I generally tend to find, I don't know whether you're thinking of the same, businesses that operate heavy goods fleets or passenger transport fleets, they have to have an operator's license. They know the rules. Yes, there are some good and there are some bad in all walks of life, but generally speaking, they're managed quite well, and they have their own experts, and I'm definitely not one of those, but I do work with somebody that is an expert within the field of HGVs. So my area of interest really is anybody that drives a car, a van, or a minibus. And guess what? That's the last slide. Yay, I can hear you saying. So has anybody got any questions? I'm going to stop the share now. Okay. So have we got time for questions? Yeah.
Is
Yeah,
that
sure.
okay,
Yeah, yeah,
Bernard?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we've got 5 minutes, so please go ahead.
Yeah. Does anybody want to ask Adrian a question before I go through the questions in the meeting chat? You just unmute yourself if you do. And no? Okay. Adrian, lots of welcomes and thank yous.
Thank you.
So how often would you recommend completing driver license checks through the DVLA for employees driving on work business?
Okay, that's a really interesting and very valid question. I'm glad it was asked. We tend to look at industry best practice when we look at these, because there's no hard and fast rules, and it's always going to be a court will decide. However, industry best practice says that anybody with up to 3 points, it would be quite adequate to do an annual license check. Okay. Anybody with between 3 and 6 points, we probably want to be checking that license half yearly. And anybody on 9 points, we probably want to be checking that monthly until those 3 points dropped back down to 6. Because if you think of when you're on 9 points, you're 3 points away from a 6-month ban, or a 12-month ban if it's your second ban. So we look at penalty points as one of those indicators of risk. And we look at the acquisition of points as you climbing up that risk ladder. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Angela, question. I look after a small electrical company with 2 apprentices who do not drive the work vans. However, they do go off to college once a week, one on a scooter and one by car. I'm guessing this will be driving for work. I'm also thinking of that they should have business insurance. Can you advise, please?
Yes, you have to be just thinking quite simply. If it wasn't for the nature of what we do, would that person have made that journey? So if they come into work and go home, that's work, that's not work related, is it? But if they're doing something that is a requirement of their employment, i.e. go to college, go to a meeting, go to a training session, then it becomes a work related journey. And if that individual is using their own vehicle, then yes, they would need to make sure they have business class insurance that covers it. If you take business class insurance out at the point of taking out your policy or renewing, that business class cover doesn't come at additional cost. It's usually built in as part of the premium. If you try and do it mid-term, there's very often an administration charge that they charge you for.
Okay, thank you. Nicholas, question. Would Adrian subscribe to a road safety app to limit accessibility while driving for work? So I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm a massive supporter of technology, but I also think we need to make sure that we empower drivers to make the right decisions. I think it's probably a two-pronged approach. First and foremost, we want to try through education and encouragement and setting standards within our policy as to what we expect people to do with regards to telecommunications in vehicles. But if that fails and there is technology that can help, then yeah, I would certainly look at it. I would probably look at it as part of a measure, not as a solution to start with.
Okay, thank you. Zahid Khan, excellent video clip. Angela, I'm going to look out for this on YouTube and play the clip to my clients. Thank you, meaningful reminder. Question from Linda. How do you advise communicating the contents of the driver handbook to drivers, as drivers are unlikely to read a 23 pages? Would this be in the form of training session?
Yeah, I think I totally accept you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. Okay. And it worries me when I hear a business say, and that's why we're not going to have a big policy, because they ain't going to read it. I think we've got to accept that people are what they are, and that is not a reason to lower standards. So what I would advise, what I do when I help a business roll out a driver risk management program is we kind of drip feed the process. We warn people it's coming. When we get to the point where we're sharing the policy, we have stressed at that point that it is a really important thing for people to understand. And again, it depends on the size and the nature of the business, because if you've got if the business is relatively large and you've got a line management structure and you have team meetings, then what I would encourage the business to do is to pick out topics from that particular policy, the poignant ones, the drugs and driving, the fatigue one, the mobile phone ones, and make sure that people understand it. But the bottom line is, and I hate to have to say this, the business needs to protect themselves should something go horribly wrong. If we've got a good policy in place and we get evidence that we've shared this with our staff and that we have got confirmation that they have read it, even if they haven't, we've done as much as we can.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Thank you. The next question, just one more. Callie Rush, how would you deal with persons who reoffend ? Accidents, speeding? So quite a history there.
Yeah, and again, you see, if we're coming into the conversation whereby we've got multiple incidents and multiple collisions and racking up penalty points, it's a difficult one, isn't it? What I would encourage the business to do is to, earlier on, I talked about ongoing driver risk profiling, didn't I? It could be utilizing the data that's coming in, the anecdotal evidence that's coming in. And we need to set up a number of triggers that are going to ensure a process. So when we get our staff member that gets their first set of 3 penalty points, or they report their first incident, their first collision or damage to the vehicle, then there should be a process that kicks in. Now, I'm not talking about coming down on the employer with a great big sledgehammer. This is about a conversation with the driver. What happened? How did it happen? And if you were able to wind the clocks back, would you do it again? And if you wouldn't, could that be the basis of how we're going to move forward? So there'll be a number of staged conversations that are going to escalate from one phase to another before we get to the point where we think we're at our wit's end, we've got to fire this person or else. So I don't know whether that was helpful, but it is a process that needs to be managed on an ongoing basis, that we don't end up with, oh my goodness, we've got somebody on 9 points, they crashed the van 4 times. I'm about to have the first conversation with them. It's a bit late then.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just fit one more in? What training would you recommend? So, e-learning, going through the policies, one-to-ones, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, training for the business and for the managers is going to be on sort of hitting a lot of the topics that I've gone with you, lovely people, this evening, but using some practical examples of what line managers could do and what they need to look out for and how they would escalate it. For drivers, my background is driver training, and I would you would probably think, well, he's bound to say, get people in the car for half a day and do driver training. It's got to be a good. It is good, but it's expensive, and it's very disruptive on the individual's time and the business time as well. So, the HSE say you should provide appropriate information and training. Well, what's appropriate? Court's going to decide that. But a really good starting point is going to be some form of online training course. It's very cost effective, it's easy to deploy, and an employee can dip in and dip out of that course until it's completed. And I tend to find in my experience that when I'm coaching a qualified driver, I'm not teaching them to drive. All I'm doing is rebooting their thought process about managing risk on the road. And this can be done really well online. So I would advocate online training as your first port of call. But then if you've got a driver who is having repeated incidents or repeated bouts of speeding, then there's a separate conversation to be had, and there might be justification then for that driver taking some form of driver coaching.
Thank you, Adrian. Has anybody got any other questions? No, brilliant. Thank you, Adrian. And over to Bernard. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Adrian. great presentation and great feedback from our members. So thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being with us this evening. So it's been great to have you today. Thank you to our committee members for continuous support of the branch. So you're always here to listen, to support, to help. So thank you so much. Our next event will be in January, 12th of January at 11 o'clock in the morning in topic Natasha's Law. So please join us then. In the meantime, you can get in touch with us on LinkedIn or via branch email address. So if you've got anything to ask, any suggestions, maybe you would like to speak or present in our next events, please get in touch. We are here to listen. And because this is last event this year, we wish you Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and see you in January. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.
Now, obviously, I'm happy for you to share the presentation that I sent you, Sharon. I don't know whether
Yeah, thank you.
do that. So, and there's also, I think one of your participants said they'd like to see the whole video. The link to that video is actually on the PDF that I've sent round.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you. Adrian.